obsolete, Mr. Wordsworth. You have no function, Mr. Wordsworth. You're an anachronism, like a ghost from another time.
I am nothing more than a reminder to you that you cannot destroy truth.
You're a bug, Mr. Wordsworth, a crawling insect, an ugly, misformed little creature who has no purpose here, no meaning.
I am a human being. I exist. And if I speak one thought out loud, that thought exists, even after I'm shoveled into my grave.
Delusions, Mr. Wordsworth. Delusions, the Bible, poetry, essays, all kinds, all of it an opiate to make you think you have a strength when you have no strength at all. You have nothing but spindly limbs and a dream, and the state has no use for your kind.
Yeah? Well, we're gonna have to do something about that. This is RiverWestRadio.com, community-supported radio streaming live from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm your host. My name is Michael Wordsworth, and welcome to Breaking Down the News, the show that presents the news highlights of the week, but with a twist. Breaking Down the News is more concerned in bringing you information that wasn't covered on the front pages. Headlines you don't want to miss, because not listening could be dangerous to your freedom, liberty, and health. And good afternoon. Welcome to Breaking Down the News. I am Michael Wordsworth on this Wednesday, the 6th of June, 2012. Welcome. Good news for some, sad news for others. Walker survived the Wisconsin recall vote. On the Republican side, people cheered. On the Democratic side, some were ready to hit the streets. It's an interesting situation. It's tragic for some. I'd like to discuss and open the phone lines today. 414-935-2951. Whether you're calling to just vent your frustration or if you actually feel that this was a good turnout yesterday, call in. Feel free. Republican, Democrat alike. Nothing I'd like more than to get us in an open forum, talking to each other rather than just sticking to our usual social circles, not going beyond the comfort zones of our social mind. So here we are. We got an article from the New York Times. Everybody was watching this in the nation yesterday. This is a report out of Waukesha, Wisconsin. Governor Scott Walker, whose decision to cut collective bargaining rights for most public workers, set off a firestorm in a state usually known for its political civility. Easily, he held on to his job Tuesday, becoming the first governor in the country to survive a recall election and dealing a painful blow to Democrats and labor unions. If you haven't heard, he obtained 53% of the vote. Mr. Walker soundly defeated Mayor Tom Barrett of Milwaukee, the Democrats' nominee in the recall attempt, who had 46%, with most precincts across the state reporting results. The victory by Mr. Walker, a Republican who was forced into an election to save his job less than 2 years into his first term, ensures that Republicans largely retain control of the state's capital, and his fast-rising political profile is likely to soar still higher among conservatives. We'll find out. People that call themselves conservatives in this state, I have to wonder. Not that I'm against conservatism. I wonder about how conservative are they? Just like on the liberal side. Are we really liberals on the Democratic side, or are we neoliberals? And on the Republican side, neoconservatives. I'd like to explain the difference, but it's just not necessary today. It's kind of a somber mood here in River West. Naturally, there's a tremendous amount of union support. And and the issue just really isn't so much are unions good or bad at this point. We know they're not what they once were in terms of why they were formed, why wages and hours and benefits and security were important to us at one point. The people organized. A lot of those guys, they gave their lives. A lot of them got beaten during the strike breaks. And in order to just go to work and feed their families, they had to endure those strike breakers. They had more guts back then. People showed up, but it seems to be a lack of political will on the end of the Democrat side, you got to have power. It's like my dad said, the unions lost their power a while ago, and you have to have your political connections. So I'd congratulate the Republicans for their victory, except that, Walker, he's just really a bonehead either way you look at it. I mean, a lot of you mainline Republicans are going to end up voting for Mitt Romney, and you don't even realize that he's the same as Barack Obama. And any Democrats voting for Barack Obama, you don't get it. You just don't get it. You still think that your government cares about you, and the leaders on either side actually give a. They don't. We're going to move on. It's been quite a tragic week. I mean, not only was it the death of the recall election, tragically, legend Ray Bradbury died. Ray Bradbury, the writer whose expansive flights of fantasy and vividly rendered spacescapes have provided the world with one of the most enduring speculative blueprints for the future. He has died and was 91. At the time of his death. Bradbury died Tuesday night. His daughter, Alexandra Bradbury, told the Associated Press. No other details were immediately available. Author of more than 27 novels and story collections, most famously The Martian Chronicles, Fahrenheit 451, and Dandelion Wine, and also Something Wicked This Way Comes. More than 600 short stories were written by Ray Bradbury, and he has frequently been credited with elevating the often maligned reputation of science fiction. Some say he single-handedly helped to move the genre into the realm of literature. Continuing with the tragedies this week, many don't know, but Bob Chapman, he had the internationalforecaster.com. Well, he passed away as well. And it's a regret. I mean, it's terrible that we lost Ray Bradbury, but he did leave us with the legacy of wonderful works that people for generations to come will enjoy. Especially, I mean, remember, he wrote Fahrenheit 451. If you're not familiar with that book, it's a short read. Go check it out, definitely. Well, Bob Chapman, he also passed away. He was a great help. I often, frequently have read his economic reports weekly on this show. And I regrettably say that this week will be his last one. This one was from June 3rd, 2012. Rest in peace, Mr. Chapman. We're going to miss you. Thank you for all your work, sir. This final report from Bob Chapman from June 3rd, 2012. When I come back, I'm Michael Wordsworth. You're listening to RiverWestRadio.com. U.S. economy delayed despite all its efforts. Bleak view from the labor market. Are states broke? How states and municipalities could bypass Wall Street. Stupid decision in the economy. Losses in the economy could increase. With the recent late-night announcement from China and Japan as to their plan to bypass the U.S. dollar and trade directly in the yuan and yen, this will bring about significant consequences for the U.S. dollar's reserve currency status. As usual, the socialist media groups are doing their best to keep this out of the public eye. Due to future toil, this could take on the already strained U.S. dollar and economy. As China, the world's largest import-exporter, along with Japan, as a major trading partner with China's slow withdrawal from the U.S. dollar, it only adds to the demise of the U.S. dollar as a fiat currency. We'll be slow and methodical. The only safe haven will be gold and silver. The U.S. economy, with all its money printing and how interest rates still remain lagging at best, and with consumer confidence slowly declining, the avenue to quantitative easing 3 is being smoothly laid. With that being said, precious metals are severely undervalued given the relativity as to what is occurring in the world as to where their prices should be. Don't allow an over-manipulated precious metals market fool you. into believing otherwise. With QE3 on its way, we should see gold prices fighting their way upwards, pulling silver along with it. The U.S. housing market's ongoing weakness, along with its recent fall in home sales by 5.5% to 95.5%, the lowest levels since December, thus far is disappointing at best and could be the signal for the beginning of a downturn in an already lagging market. With the housing market being one of the U.S. economy's toughest hurdles to overcome during an attempt at recessionary recovery, and millions of current homeowners being underwater on their homes, forcing them to be extremely cautious with their spending habits, thus far causing a severe holding pattern for an economic recovery. Adding fuel to the fire are the abundance of unsold properties and the continuing foreclosures, as is evident with the midweek report showing contracts fell 12% in the western U.S., 6.8% in the South, slightly lower in the Midwest, and a slight rise in the Northeast. Another factor overshadowing the recovery is the faltering application demand for refinancing home mortgages. They decreased 1.3% in the week ending May 25th. As would be expected, the National Association of Realtors downplayed the declines in pending home sales. Views on the labor markets deteriorated this month. The board survey showed 7.9% of respondents think jobs are now plentiful, down from 8.4% thinking that in April. And 41.0% think jobs are hard to get, up from 38.1% last month. Confidence among U.S. consumers unexpectedly fell in May to the lowest levels in 4 months as optimism about employment prospects faded. The Conference Board's index decreased 64.9% this month from a revised 68.7% in April. Figures for the New York-based private research group showed today home prices in 20 cities dropped in the 12 months ending in March at the slowest pace in more than a year, according to yet another report. The share of Americans expecting fewer job opportunities in the next 6 months climbed to the highest level since November, raising the risk that consumers will limit spending. A 30-cent decline in gasoline prices since early April failed to brighten spirits, showing that more progress is needed in the job market. Quote from Aaron Smith, a senior economist at Moody's Analytics, Inc., gasoline prices aren't doing the trick. His forecast was closest to the actual facts. We are making progress when it comes to the labor market, but clearly this is another sign that it is still very slow going. Stocks gained after Greek opinion polls eased concern the country will leave the euro. The Standard & Poor's 500 index climbed to 1.1% to 1,332.42 at the close in New York. Crude oil for July delivery on the New York Mercantile Exchange settled at $90.76 a barrel, down 10 cents. Home prices in 20 U.S. cities fell 2.6% in the 12 months ended in March, the smallest decrease since December 2010, according to an S&P Case-Shiller Index of Property Values. I'm Michael Wordsworth, reading the final weekly excerpt of Bob Chapman's International Forecaster from internationalforecaster.com. In a moment, when I come back, we have a very exciting interview with David Rockefeller. That's right, you heard me. Don't go away because you're not going to want to miss this. It's not often we get a chance to actually have an interview opportunity with the rich and powerful David Rockefeller. So please, stay tuned. You're listening to RiverWestRadio.com. Once again, the Bilderberg meeting is happening today in Chantilly, Virginia, where many of Europe's top bankers and technocrats are gathering in secret to plan the global economy for the next 12 months. To get a deeper view of this, Breaking Down the News has met with David Rockefeller in Virginia. Mr. Rockefeller, thank you for joining us.
Yes, yes, of course. I'm sure this is a big moment in your pathetic life as a news talk show host.
Now, do you prefer that I call you Evil or just Mr. Rockefeller or David Evil Rockefeller?
Ooh, that sounds good, yes. Call me David Evil Rockefeller. I like the sound of that.
Very well, Mr. Evil Rockefeller. Now, Bilderberg, the not so secret meeting taking place this week.
Now, hold on there a second. We are grateful to the Washington Post, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. But now, since the New York Times betrayed me, I would like to retract my praise for the cowardly media outlets that leaked our little get-togethers to the mainstream. Boo! Hiss! Hiss! It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is more sophisticated and prepared to march toward a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national auto-determination practiced in past centuries.
But Mr. Evil.
That's David Evil Rockefeller to you.
My apologies.
No, you should get it right. You're a reporter for Lucifer's sake.
Pardon me, David Evil Rockefeller.
That's better. Normally, we hate to be forced out of the shadows, but some fat bastard keeps blowing a bullhorn at my hotel room all weekend, shouting, "The answer to 1984 is 1776 or something like that." I mean, what the Hades does that mean? Well, this unruly blowhard has got the people all up in arms.
Well, yes, the people are revolting.
They most certainly are.
Pardon?
The people, yes, they are most revolting.
No, I meant the people are revolting against these secret meetings taking place now that the public has become aware of them.
Oh, that. Well, of course, but they don't pay attention. They don't listen. Most don't even know who I am or what I do.
That isn't true. Not of the young people these days. They don't see much of a future ahead of them because of men like you and the Bilderberg attendees. The younger generations are starting to really pay attention.
Ah, but that is exactly why I created Justin Bieber. Made him out of some spare parts I had laying around.
I would still say the tide is turning and the people are waking up to your corrupt technocratic system.
This present window of opportunity, during which a truly peaceful and independent world order might be built, will not be open for long. We are on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis, and the nations will accept the new world order.
All right, calm down, calm down. At this year's meeting of the Bilderbergers, you've got some big-time European heavyweights there. Dr. Joseph Ackerman, Angela Merkel, Herman Van Rompuy, all meeting with you to figure out what to do with the economy for the next 12 months. Now, if Greece is to leave the Eurozone, the rumor is that the Bilderbergs are panicking.
I don't think Greece is going to leave the euro. Germany doesn't want it to leave the euro, and Greece signed off on this memorandum with Troika, as it's called, which is effectively turning their sovereignty over to outside forces, and it's up to Germany, not the Greek people. They lost their sovereignty. I don't see that happening. It's not up to them. It's not their choice. Germany wants to keep Greece, to keep the euro cheap. If it wasn't for Greece, the Deutschmark would trade like the Swiss franc. It would be 20 or 30% higher, and their whole export model would crumble. Right now, Germany is making it out like bandits. They're making money the old-fashioned way.
By earning it?
No, by stealing it. Since the reunification of Germany, Something that wouldn't have happened without the euro. Germany has become a superpower once again.
Basically, it's a leveraged buyout. All the assets of Greece are being taken by outsiders. And those are good income-producing assets like shipping, tourism, lotteries.
You are forgetting the gold mines. Don't forget the gold mines.
Right, gold mines. Those were privatized and sold off, correct?
Yes, approximately 111 tons of gold. I'm going to melt it all down and make little figurines of Justin Bieber that the kids can pray to.
But the IMF is bankrupt and they're lending money to Greece. They had to borrow trillions to execute a leveraged buyout.
Ah, but the real trick is getting the Greeks to sign on to this debt. Get it? We borrow the money to lend to them and then take over their sovereignty as we buy out their assets. It's brilliant, simply brilliant.
And then those assets go back to the IMF creditors.
They want the fees. Christine Lagarde says, just give me the fees. Give me my salary and you can rob the Greeks blind for all I care.
Evil, truly evil.
That is why I am called David Evil Rockefeller.
So it's like Mitt Romney when he was at Bain Capital. They just look for small companies and gut them. And in a like manner, Greece is just a small country that you can seize with a hostile takeover.
It is a Jimmy Goldsmith model, done on a bigger scale. Same thing. You pledge the assets of a country like Greece to secure loans to take over the country. Sell the assets, keep the difference, make lots of money. The people lose their sovereignty, their jobs, and I get to add another platinum-covered toilet in my horse stable.
So these Bilderberg meetings are a great way for you and the world's leaders to meet behind the scenes with no transparency and just basically decide the fate of any given economy.
Well, yes, and up until now it was a secret, but no matter. It was no coincidence that we took Ireland, Greece, Portugal, and then Spain in that order. This year, the big question is, where do we go next? France? Maybe UK is an interesting choice. It's similar to how you peasants buy houses, but we get entire countries for pennies on the dollar, you see.
The IMF, since the 60s, has preyed on Africa, then South America, then Southeast Asia.
Yes, well, while America was obsessed with Iraq, we were very busy taking over those regions.
But China threw you a curveball. They had a different model.
Well, China did good business, and that is inconsistent with Bilderberger policy. However, the U.S. can't really tangle with China because China is now the U.S. biggest creditor, and the whole thing is a sticky situation.
I would like to read you a quote from Bill Moyers about you. May I?
Ooh, yes. If it's about me, Mommy always talked about me, and I liked it. Talk about me, talk about me.
David Evil Rockefeller is the most conspicuous representative today of the ruling class, a multinational fraternity of men who shaped the global economy and managed the flow of its capital. Rockefeller was born into it, and he has made the most of it. But some critics see a vast international conspiracy he considers a circumstance of life and just another day's work. In the world of David Rockefeller, it's hard to tell where business ends and politics begins.
It is. It really is. Some days I wonder how history will look back on my takeover of the United States, and they will ask that very question and just don't know how I would answer even now.
So you admit that you want to take over the United States?
For more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents, such as my encounter with Castro, to attack the Rockefeller family for inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe they are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I'm proud of it.
Wait, didn't you write that in your personal memoirs?
Ooh, you're a smart one, Mr. Wordsworth.
Well, thank you, I guess.
No, I hate that. Hate it. The second we gain control of America, people like you will have to go. And by go, I mean disappeared with black hoods over your heads. Now that is scary. You should be scared. Very scared.
I am not afraid.
Oh, you will be. You will be.
This has been an exclusive interview with David E. Rockefeller in Chantilly, Virginia. I'm Michael Wordsworth. Back in a moment. You're listening to RiverWestRadio.com. How to fight water fluoridation in your city is the topic this afternoon. We recently had Alderman Jim Bowl put through a petition to attempt to remove fluoridation in Milwaukee's water supply. It was backed up by Dr. Connett, Dr. Paul Connett, who also gave us a wonderful interview on Monday, June 4th. Please check out that if you have not. It's available at Breaking Down the News shows at riverwestradio.com. This report from Natural News by Mike Adams explains a little bit how we can help out there. Water fluoridation has become quite easily the hot-button political issue in America today, especially as the pro-fluoride establishment is increasingly being forced to address the myriad of emerging scientific evidence highlighting the dangers of fluoride. But many city officials and legislators continue to remain largely unaware of, and in some cases willfully defiant against, the truth about fluoride. Still entrenched in the political framework of public health today is the idea that artificially fluoridating public water supplies prevents tooth decay and lessens the overall costs associated with dental treatments. This flawed ideology dates back to about the 1930s, when the aluminum mining and smelting industries concocted a way to dispose of their unwanted fluoride chemical byproducts by pushing them on the unsuspecting masses as a remedy for tooth decay. Though science has never backed up this and many other claims made by the pro-fluoride lobby, fluoridation remains a blindly accepted public health measure throughout America today. And yet at the same time, things are also starting to change as citizens, health officials, and former fluoride advocates learn the facts about fluoride and begin spreading the truth. Hundreds of North American communities have axed fluoride from their water supplies in recent decades, and many more are in a position to follow suit if science can ultimately break the political stronghold that is holding on for dear life to the fluoride myth. Well, again, this week, Eric Holder made the news constantly. This time he declares war on states' rights. This report from Kevin Coach Collins, westernjournalism.com on June 5th, 2012. The Department of Justice thinks it can order Florida to stop removing illegal non-citizens from her voter registration rolls. The Sunshine State announced it will ignore the order. Let's see Barack Obama and Eric Holder back it up. The fight over states' rights versus the strength of an all-powerful central government has been set in motion. The fuse is lit. Since Barack Obama and his Chicago thugs forced, bribed, and tricked Obamacare into law, real America has been on a collision course with him. This latest attack on our freedoms will likely only be settled by a courtroom showdown centering on whether the 10th Amendment to our Constitution has any meaning at all. Congresswoman reports that TSA hiring pedophiles to conduct pat-downs. Federal agencies staffed with criminals due to inadequate background checks. This report from Paul Joseph Watson, Infowars.com. Tennessee Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn has released a report documenting how the TSA is hiring pedophiles and child pornographers to conduct pat-downs. Not a good idea. This report details highly disturbing cases where pedophiles and child pornographers were wearing federal law enforcement uniforms, are not only patting down unsuspecting travelers, but in many cases stealing valuables from their bags. Enough is enough. It's time for Congress to step in and demand accountability from Administrator Pistole, who's in charge of that. The report contains 50 examples of the TSA's most dangerous officers, listing innumerable examples of TSA agents caught engaged in criminal behavior, from assault to theft, child pornography, molesting children, in cases documented from 2005 onwards. Blackburn says the report illustrates how the federal agency, quote, needs to immediately remove themselves from the human resource business, end quote, adding that the decision to give TSA agents uniforms that mimic law enforcement agencies, despite officers having next to zero law enforcement training, was a critical mistake. TSOs and BDOs have zero federal law enforcement training despite their federal law enforcement titles, uniforms, and metal badges. In many cases, TSOs and BDOs have less training than security guards in most states. For example, in California, security guards may receive permits to carry firearms, tear gas, and batons. Due to their lack of training and abuse of power, TSOs and BDOs should return to the previous title and uniforms that were in use prior to the TSA administrative reclassification in 2005, states the report. The report also emphasizes how the fact that TSA agents are so routinely caught engaged in criminal behavior is by no means an aberration, but stems from, quote, hiring TSA's practices and insufficient use of background checks. This includes the TSA's recruitment policy, which, instead of representing an intelligent, risk-based organization, actually fails to conduct criminal and credit background checks on many of its employees while advertising. The report also states, for employment at the Washington Reagan National Airport, on pizza boxes and on advertisements, have pumps at discount gas stations in the D.C. area. As we have previously highlighted, the TSA displays little regard for the character of those who employ to work in airport security. Indeed, one example, a spoof caller phoned the federal agency and pretended to be interested in a TSA job so he could act out his sexual perversions. The caller was treated seriously by a TSA staffer on the other end of the line. When the spoof caller asked the TSA staffer if he could fondle breasts, the staffer responded, "If that is what is required by your job position, yes." This from the Washington Post business section. Commodity prices drop on economic woes in Europe, China, and the U.S. From the copper mines in Chile to the corn farms in North Dakota to the oil fields of the Middle East, commodity prices have started to crumble. The prices of metals, energy, and agricultural goods have dropped as anxiety is ratcheted up over Europe's currency crisis, China's slowing growth, and the stalling U.S. economy. On Friday, copper futures fell to their lowest level of 2012. On Monday, cotton fell to a 31-month low. Sugar hit a 21-month low as well. Last week, the price of OPEC's basket of crude oil grades slipped below $100 a barrel for the first time in nearly 8 months. We've seen a decline in corn prices over the past few months, said Barton Schott, a third-generation farmer in Culm, North Dakota, who is chairman of the National Corn Growers Association. I think it's all related to the world economy and price of the dollar, he said, adding that outside investors and investment funds that had big buyers earlier in the year had reversed course and started selling corn a month and a half ago. The recent drop in commodity prices could open up more room for fiscal or monetary stimulus without worries about igniting inflation. Quote, I think it remains the case that deflation should be more of the concern of public officials than inflation, said Edward Morse, head of global commodities research at Citigroup. He goes on to explain that this provides a green light for more stimulus, particularly monetary stimulus, said Mark Zandi, chief economist of Moody'sEconomy.com. With lower commodity prices, you get lower inflation. He said he expects central banks to press on the accelerator and to engage quantitative easing, a method of easing interest rates by buying securities. All right, I have to interrupt this regularly scheduled article reading because as I'm reading this article, I'm feeling out there that a lot of you are not grasping some of these concepts. Not because you're ignorant of them, but because this article is misleading you and throwing a little bit of spin here. You know, it's probably a good situation that commodities have dropped for a second. We could use the ease in inflation, but there is a fool's rally taking place in the stock market today. Stocks have been fluctuating, trying to go down, and then they jumped up another 200%. Sorry, not 200%. That would be phenomenal. They jumped up 244 points at the high at some point today. And this is contingent that Europe is going to somehow get itself out of its current debt crisis. It's not. I'm going to read some articles a little bit later. Meanwhile, it appears that the market is trying to bolster itself up, which I can't blame it attempting to do, but we're not standing on solid ground here. We're standing on shaky quicksand ground. It's not a good thing. I can tell you this, you can expect to see the stock market to start going down again just as soon as Europe flares up. It's probably going to be sometime this summer. Oil prices falling below $100 a barrel. I mean, in general, that's good for you out there. It's good for me. It's good for everybody because not only is it cheaper gas at the pump, by and large, although those prices aren't always correlated, it does mean that the inflation, the hidden inflation on goods and services will not be rising while gas prices remain low. Keep in mind, trucks have to deliver food and goods. People have to drive to their work for services. That jacks up the cost of your fees. For inflation fighters, the key issue is the direction of prices, not the price level. But most commodity prices are still high by historical standards. Though corn prices have dropped about 14% in the past year, shot is still getting about $5.25 a bushel. High compared with prices before and after 2008's price spike. He is adding to his corn acreage and is building a 100,000 bushel storage facility. I'd keep it up, Farmer Shot, because commodities will come back. You know why they'll come back? Because the dollar is only being bolstered because people have nowhere to run right now, including the Chinese that are sitting on approximately 1.5 trillion U.S. Treasury dollars, so to speak. And they're holding $1.5 trillion of our debt. Believe me, there's nowhere to run in the world when the euro starts diminishing other than to the U.S. dollar, and that makes us look good, but it's not necessarily a good thing. For commodities such as oil that are priced in dollars, the weakening euro has kept prices high in Europe. Over the past decade, the drivers behind the huge increase in demand for goods such as copper and oil, both closely tied to economic activity, have been the emerging market countries. Amrita Sen, a commodities analyst for Barclays Capital, says that, quote, all of the growth in oil demand is being generated by 4 countries. Listen close: China, India, Saudi Arabia, and Brazil. In Europe and the United States, oil demand is flat or declining. That's rather interesting. In a May 15 presentation and analysis, Richard C. Atkinson, chief executive of mining giant Freeport-McMoRan, said China's economic growth could slow, but still fuel higher demand for commodities because its increases in consumption would come on top of a bigger baseline. He noted that China averaged 13% a year growth from 1995 to 2010, and its copper consumption grew. Copper consumption grew by 6 million tons a year, or 37% of the global consumption. If China's growth slows to 6% a year, by 2025, the country's copper consumption would increase by 9.2 million tons a year, he said during a slide presentation. And as I always like to say regarding forecasts like that, by 2025, we ain't even going to recognize these countries or these worlds. It's hard to say what will be left by 2025. Of course, the global elite think that they're going to be living in a wonderful feudalistic society with the rest of us basically killed off and working in some sort of slave caste system, but we'll see how that goes. It's all up to us. Pages of history are turning every day here, and it's incredible. This report from the Business Insider on Money Game. When I come back from this short break, I'm Michael Wordsworth. Hang in there. The news, it's mostly depressing today. But, you know, I'd rather hear it than shun away from it. It gets kind of addictive after a while listening to this stuff. Take care. I'll be right back. Everything you need to know about the failing Spanish bank Bankia is right here in this Business Insider report. Bankia is at the heart of concerns about the fragility of the Spanish banking sector right now, as the Spanish government contemplates a way to provide the bank with a 19 billion euro, 24 billion US dollars bailout. The third largest Spanish bank, formed after a merger of 7 troubled cajas in late 2010, it also holds 40.83 billion euros in toxic real estate assets. That's the highest quantity of domestic real estate assets of any Spanish bank, investments which have been failing in the wake of a housing bubble. Just a few weeks ago, the Spanish government essentially nationalized the troubled lender. The Spanish Bank Bailout Fund, known as the Fondo de Reconstrucción Ordenada, converted its 4.5 billion euro in holdings in Bankia's parent Banco Financiero de Ahorros into a 45% controlling stake in the company. It also shook up Bankia's board, unseating former chairman Rodrigo Rato, with BBVA alum Jose Ignacio Giogolzari. Apologize, Mr. Giogolzari. It has also agreed to inject some 19 billion euros into the troubled lender to keep it afloat. The biggest news today is about how the Spanish government will do that, and what the bailout method will mean for Spain. 2 reports are circulating right now, neither of which include a bailout from international lenders. First, Spain has been considering giving Bankia funding in the Spanish government bonds, which it would use as collateral against the loan from the European Central Bank. While analysts have doubted the likelihood of this plan, a source close to Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy and consulted by Reuters España said, quote, "The ECB, the European Central Bank, has been consulted about this extensively. The situation has already been utilized before by Germany and Ireland and is perfectly valid. I understand that the ECB doesn't have any problem with it." The other possibility would be issuing government debt in the markets to fund the bailout. According to a Reuters source, while this is technically a viable option, Spain's willingness to place an even bigger burden on government debt is troubling because the country is already paying a steep 5.4% on a 3-year borrowing and 6.4% on 10-year borrowing. This would also spread losses out over the wider Spanish populace, something that the government has been loath to do. While more and more investors are clamoring for international aid for the Spanish banking sector, it is unclear that this short-term boost would be a long-term positive gain for Spain. Not only would this underscore the fragility of the Spanish government and likely lead to more speculative bets against it in the markets, it would make the country reliant on institutions which have so far fallen short of providing adequate crisis solutions. Mubarak, the ex-Egyptian dictator, suffers heart attack after moments being told he will spend the rest of his life in jail. This report from Susanna Hills, thedailymail.co.uk, June 22nd, 2012. I apologize, June 2nd. Former Egyptian dictator Hosni Mubarak suffered a heart attack today, just moments after being told he would spend the rest of his life in jail. Following a lengthy trial, the man who ruled over the country for 30 years was sentenced after being found guilty of being complicit in the killings of protesters during the country's uprising. The ruling came at a politically fraught time for Egypt, 2 weeks before a runoff in its first free presidential election that will pit the Muslim Brotherhood, which was banned under Mubarak, against the deposed autocrat's last prime minister. EFF tells California's Supreme Court that warrantless DNA collection unconstitutional. I'll have more about collecting your DNA and why that's unconstitutional after this quick station identification. You're listening to RiverWestRadio.com. DNA is the most intimate and revealing part of a human body, with the potential to reveal a person and their family's medical history and predisposition to disease. The EFF tells California Supreme Court warrantless DNA collection unconstitutional. Ray Bradbury died today, and now this news report is somewhat on the verge of science fiction, but I'm telling you it's science fact today. Yes, DNA is the most intimate and revealing part of the human body. It is your genetic map. Because it's so sensitive, they filed an amicus brief in the California Supreme Court urging it to rule that the Fourth Amendment prohibits the warrantless collection of DNA from individuals presumed innocent who are not yet convicted of a crime. If you listen to what this article from Hani Fakhori, EFF.com, is reporting on June 5th, 2012, they're basically talking about taking and collecting your DNA for permanent record. Got to ask yourself, do you want your DNA on file? They do it for criminals. They do it for people driving through certain states. It's unconstitutional. Although when the Constitution was written, it didn't cover such knowledgeable things as DNA. But that's all part of our job today, to stay informed and cast our decision. Do we want people having access to our genetic code on file? Over the last few years, the federal government has been building up a massive DNA database called CODIS that stores DNA samples collected by local, state, and federal law enforcement officials investigating crimes. While CODIS was initially concerned only with the collection of DNA of convicted felons, the government is quickly expanding its reach to cover two more populations: individuals entering the immigration system and arrestees. There are now over 10 million DNA samples in CODIS from all over the country, and 17% of them are from California. We recently published a white paper explaining in detail biometric collection in the immigration system, and we've repeatedly warned courts across the country in numerous amicus briefs that the government's warrantless collection of DNA from arrestees, individuals who have not yet been convicted of a crime, is unconstitutional. While federal courts While federal courts have been pursuing this case, and they've upheld the practice, last summer, the California Court of Appeal ruled in People versus Buza that California's warrantless DNA collection and the placing of the samples of CODIS is unconstitutional. And earlier this year, the Maryland Court of Appeal found in King versus State most warrantless arrestee DNA collection unconstitutional. With the Buza decision now on review to the California Supreme Court, our amicus brief urges the affirmance of the lower court's decision. We note that advances in technology have made DNA collection cheaper and thus easier and more widespread. And while the Fourth Amendment acknowledges that privacy rights of individuals convicted of a crime are diminished, expanding warrantless DNA collection to individuals merely arrested for a crime, along with individuals in the immigration system who have no criminal record, are steps on a course towards a future where everyone's DNA is collected and maintained by the government, whether they were ever suspected of anything at all. We're optimistic that with the decisions in Buza and King, those two cases appearing in court, beginning to fully grasp the ability of technology to shrink privacy and see that DNA collection should be narrowed, not expanded. I'm Michael Wordsworth. We'll be right back. Fukushima reactor number 4 continues to puzzle the experts. This from a June 5th report on Culture of Life News. Fukushima is mostly ignored by our media, which also ignores the Bilderberg gang, and a lot of other important information that you, the public, should be aware of. There's a photo taken during the recent TEPCO tour of reactor number 4, and this photo depicts the 5th floor of number 4's reactor building at the Fukushima number 1 nuclear power plant, as seen on May 26. The spent fuel pool is on the right, covered with a white tarp. The rest of it is crumpled metal that is terribly obstructing everything around it. The entire structure is on the point of caving in, but TEPCO, Japan's utility company, power and utility company, has put supports under part of the pool. But this mess is far from being fixed, and all the workers there are reaching their lifetime limits of radiation exposure. And the rest of the population nearby is certainly exposed to very dangerous levels, especially children. The government of Japan is mostly focused on getting control of some disputed islands that China claims. So the latest volley in this futile folly is Japan calling Chinese military spending a threat. Even as the Chinese dragon reels in the Japanese, they struggle to control things using the U.S. military machine as their weapon of choice. This week, the Pentagon and both presidential candidates said they were going to focus most of our military on Asia, which everyone knows means China. So while Japanese rulers duel with the Chinese, they also are freaking out about how nearly all nuclear power has come to a halt, and this is causing trade deficits to appear. So they are muscling along a restart of these reactors no matter what happens. If you don't remember, last week, actually 2 weeks ago, I reported that Japan shut down its 50th nuclear reactor. It's a lot of power for that country. And yes, that would affect the economy. That was a bold step by them, but now they want to get them back online. We'll see. Behind the Union, a group of township governments where the nuclear power plant is located, Behind the union's turnaround was the central government's pressure and lobbying by KEPCO and the Kansai Economic Federation, headed by KEPCO chairman Shosuke Mori. The call for a 15% reduction in power consumption apparently played an important role. If the central government decides to restart the OI reactors, it will be a decision made in the absence of a solid foundation to ensure the safety of nuclear power generation. The sole scientific basis for restarting the OI reactors 3 and 4 is the results of a stress test. But a stress test is, after all, a computer simulation whose results can vary depending on the data fed into the computers and the computer programs used. Computers simulate only the parameters that the programmer installs. Mother Nature, on the other hand, does whatever she wants. In previous safety plans, the maximum earthquake data was under 7.6 magnitude. In reality, it was greater. Each nuclear disaster is caused by different things, so the number of things causing this multiplies each 20 years statistically. We can't possibly know all probabilities or possibilities. This from a TEPCO email, TEPCO being Japan's main energy provider. Quote, possible recriticality in reactor number 2A. Japanese publication has obtained an email sent from a worker in TEPCO's engineering division. Here's an excerpt of the email from a report in June 8th, 2012 edition of the weekly Asahi via Yahoo, translated by Fukushima Diary. From looking at reactor number 2's water level, which is 60 centimeters, it is obvious that the PCV and suppression chamber are severely damaged. It is very likely that a new heating mass is generated from recriticality. We cannot tell exactly what is happening inside of PCV. We can never deny the possibility of recriticality. The nuclear dragon can be snoozing or growling or lashing out or blindly blowing up everything. Most of the time, we have little idea what is really going on once the initial release of power happens. All data collection vanishes or becomes very obscure. I wonder what the Bilderberg gang is saying today. Are they trying to figure out how to pull the wool over our eyes? I'm sure on this issue, it's a very crucial issue. Fukushima number 4. Japan's ongoing nuclear problem. The Bilderberg Group, the global ruling elite, convinced the green people that the only way to save humanity was to have an infinite derivative swap market in CO2 pollution coupled with nuclear power plants. This scam, a bad solution to a bad problem, worked for a while and for the moment. The Greens who supported nuclear power, insane derivative games, are silent. But the elites want both of these programs because it will make them all richer. The U.S. public has gone passive as they worry about jobs, but luckily for them, the price of oil is now falling, so is the tension. The fear is dropping. People love burning oil very much, don't they? The Japanese experts are very scared for Japan. Is it a big place and much of its best farmland has been ravaged by nuclear pollution? That report from a Japanese nuclear expert who says, quote, when I try to figure out the true magnitude of damage, I am overwhelmed. Almost all of Fukushima Prefecture would be abandoned if government regulations were applied. This is a catastrophe for all of Japan. Back to reactor number 4, Japan TV said, we have discovered a new hidden danger at reactor 4. There's another way fuel rods can be damaged. When it reached the latter part of 700 degrees Celsius, what has happened to the fuel rod? This new hidden danger of the fuel rods. During the heat test, a change has occurred when the temperatures of the fuel rod reached latter part of 700 degrees Celsius. The fuel cladding has ruptured now. When it ruptured, the temperature was at 780 degrees Celsius. You can see from these diagrams I'm looking at, or if you go online and Google Fukushima reactor images, you can see that the rods are hot. The fuel cladding is supposed to contain the radioactive fuel, but it is expanded, and a hole has appeared. This is the ruptured hole after it's been heated. If you can see this diagram. In reality, other than meltdown, there was another way in which the fuel rods could be damaged. Furthermore, when the fuel rods are subjected to a rapid temperature change, not only it creates holes, the whole fuel rod could disintegrate completely. We'll continue to bring you more information on Japan's terrible nuclear crisis. It's not a good situation for the world's fourth largest economy. Many of the car parts and electronic parts that are built here have exclusive functioning parts made only in Japan. We're moving now on to this article from The Guardian, the London Guardian, by Ed Villamy. Western banks reaping billions from Colombian cocaine trade. Is it any surprise? Not to me. The vast profits made from drug production and trafficking are overwhelmingly reaped in rich consuming countries, principally across Europe and the U.S., rather than war-torn producing nations such as Colombia and Mexico, new research has revealed. And its authors claim that financial regulators in the West are reluctant to go after Western banks in pursuit of the massive amount of drug money being laundered through their systems. The most far-reaching and detailed analysis to date of the drug economy in any country, in this case Colombia, shows that 2.6% of the total street value of cocaine produced remains within the country, while a staggering 97.4% of profits are reaped by criminal syndicates and laundered by banks in first world consuming countries such as ours. This quote from one of the authors of the study, Alejandro Gaviria, launching its English edition last week, the quote states, "The story of who makes the money from Colombian cocaine is a metaphor for the disproportionate burden placed in every way on producing nations like Colombia as a result of the prohibition of drugs." Definitely interesting. We will follow up on all of those as time goes on. Greek power regulators calls emergency meeting to avert collapse of power grid and natural gas system. This article concerning Greece, they've been going through a lot of problems lately. Definitely we have to take into consideration they're not a big part of the European economy. They're only about 1 to 2%, declining rapidly. I read some issues, but basically Germany's got itself in Greece, but attempting to bail it out, which only keeps the Deutschmark low. Why would German elite power brokers want to keep the Deutschmark low? The answer is pretty simple when you understand that if they actually didn't do that, the Deutschmark would be strong, very, very strong, like the Swiss franc is. It would trade 20 to 30% higher, and this would terribly devastate the German export model. Well, this article from Mac Slavo reports that the Greek power regulators calls emergency meeting to avert collapse of power grid and natural gas systems. I'm Michael Wordsworth. I'm going to be right back and tell you more about this developing crisis. You're listening to RiverWestRadio.com. Greek power regulators calls emergency meeting to avert collapse of power grid and natural gas system in Greece. When the political and economic systems of entire nations collapse, the consequences are devastating. Earlier this year, pharmacies and hospitals in Greece were unable to provide life-saving medications due to shortages caused by a freeze in the flow of credit from manufacturers to distributors to patients. A collapse of the country's economy has forced many Greeks to turn to black market barter economies and has left millions financially devastated with no hopes of finding an income stream for the foreseeable future. The credit system of the entire country is in shambles, so much so that reports are emerging about the food shortages and hunger within the Greek prison system, suggesting that serious problems in the food delivery chain have begun to materialize. As Nigel Farage warned recently, we are beginning to see the rise of extreme political parties as a consequence of the total and utter desperation of the populace. Today, the news gets even worse. Greece's regulatory authority for energy, known as the RAE, announced an emergency meeting to deal with what can only be construed as a telltale sign that this crisis is very rapidly reaching critical mass and may spiral out of control in the very near future. This quote, Greece's power regulator, RAE, told Reuters on Friday it was calling in an emergency meeting next week to avert a collapse of the debt-stricken country's electricity and natural gas system. The regulator's chief, Nikos Vasilikos, told Reuters RAE is taking crisis initiatives throughout next week to avert the collapse of the natural gas and electricity system. The RAE took the decision after receiving a letter from Greece's natural gas company, DEPA, which threatened to cut supplies to electricity producers if they failed to settle their arrears with the company. That source from Reuters. You may have thought the financial collapse of 2008 was bad. That was just a warm-up. The main event is staring us in the face, and the whole of Europe has front row seats. We've repeatedly warned about what author James Rawles portrays in his fictional yet prescient account of the effects of an economic collapse has on society. In his book Patriots and his follow-up book Survivors, Rawles details, and that's spelled R-A-W-L-E-S, Rawls details the loss of confidence in a nation's currency and credit, a collapse of basic services, the emergence of bartering, the collapse of power grids and supply infrastructure due to lack of money and labor, the rise of political extremes, and even the civil unrest and war that follows. Do you still think this can only happen in fiction novels? Or in countries like Greece or Czechoslovakia or Argentina? It can happen here. It's going to real soon. Hard to say, the summer 2012, possibly into fall, but definitely by 2013. Ouch, look out. We are now seeing the first signs of this happening inside the European Union, the largest economic zone in the world. If there is one thing we can surmise based on the last 4 years, it's that the contagion is spreading and cannot be contained. Today it's Greece. Tomorrow it could be your hometown. I'm Michael Wordsworth. These are words worth listening to. You're listening to RiverWestRadio.com. Moving on to Europe, this report from Ruth Sunderland at the UK Daily Mail on December 7, 2010. Euro at risk of collapse, says Treasury watchdog of economic crisis sweeps continent. The euro is at risk still today of collapse as economists' crisis sweeps the continent. Britain's independent Treasury watchdog warned. General consensus is that the currency unions eventually fail. Professor Steve Nicol, a senior member at the Office for Budget Responsibility, told MPs on the most powerful Treasury Select Committee. And the OBR's chairman, Robert Chote, added, We are not assuming a cataclysmic outcome for the Eurozone, but, as Steve said, monetary arrangements come and monetary arrangements go. The admission by the leading economist came as Eurozone finance ministers held an emergency meeting in Brussels to discuss the possible measures to shore up the single currency. Greece and Ireland have already been forced to accept bailouts, with Britain making its own $3.2 billion direct loan to Ireland. A human barcode. The Bible always stated that one day there'd be a mark placed on man, a mark in which you could not buy or sell, and it's something that many Christians have paid attention to. It's hard to say. Could it be the collection of DNA? Could it be an actual barcode? Could it be just a biometric scan, such as the eye imprints or fingerprints? Well, the question from Megan Neal from the New York Daily News.com, she wants to know, would you barcode your baby? Microchip implants have become standard practice for our pets, but we've been a tougher sell when it comes to the idea of putting them in people. Science fiction author Elizabeth Moon last week rekindled the debate on whether it's a good idea to barcode infants at birth in an interview on a BBC radio program. I would insist on every individual, this quote she said on the Forum, a weekly show that features a global thinking discussion, a radical, inspiring, or controversial idea for 60 seconds. She states, I would insist on every individual having a unique ID permanently attached, a barcode, if you will, an implanted chip to provide an easy, fast, inexpensive way to identify individuals. Well, I gotta tell you, I don't want the barcode on me, folks. What are you gonna do? Something that just never seems to end, does it? In any case, the number to call in here is 414-935-2951. I was hoping we'd get some callers in today expressing their frustration over the lost election last night, or possibly some Republicans willing to cheer and gloat their victory. Unfortunately, we haven't received any phone calls today. I don't know, a lot of people are at work right now, but it would be nice to hear from somebody on occasion. It really, really would. In any case, if you have an opinion regarding the last night's election, please feel free. Call in 414-935-2951. We're going to continue here just to recap some of today's top stories. Ray Bradbury died. Tragic loss. Author of probably one of his more famous books, Something Wicked This Way Comes, and Fahrenheit 451. Indeed. Also, Bob Chapman from the International Forecaster. He's passed away as well. I'm sure many was nowhere near as famous as Ray Bradbury, but he was indeed a great economic forecaster, and we're going to definitely miss his contribution. Moving on today, we're going to talk more about the economic demise of our own country. I have a really good article to pull out here from Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. Wish we could get him on the show. Maybe we'll try. We're going to have Rosa Kohr. She's the author of Behind the Green Mask, UN Agenda 21. I've been reading from her book for a while, and she's agreed to do an interview with us on June 15th. Very exciting. If you don't know what Agenda 21, if you haven't heard me speak of it, Agenda 21 is something you need to know about. It's what normally people would say would be a conspiracy theory right out in the open as an actual agenda from the United Nations to take over our municipalities, our local governments, from the national, state, and local level on down. When I come back, we're going to read some more news from Dr. Paul Craig Roberts with his opinion. Definitely a very interesting article. I'll be right back. Welcome to Breaking Down the News. I am Michael Wordsworth with Words Worth Listening To. This end of the close for today comes from Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. This article originally appeared on Infowars.com on June 6, 2012, titled Collapse at Hand. Ever since the beginning of the financial crisis and quantitative easing, the question has been before us. How can the Federal Reserve maintain zero interest rates for banks and negative real interest rates for savers and bondholders when the U.S. government is adding $1.5 trillion to the national debt every year via its budget deficits? Not long ago, the Fed announced that it was going to continue this policy for another 2 or 3 years. Indeed, the Fed is locked into this policy. Without the artificially low interest rates, the debt services on the national debt would be so large that it would raise questions about the U.S. Treasury's credit rating and the viability of the dollar. And the trillions of dollars in interest rate swaps and other derivatives would come unglued. In other words, financial deregulation leading to Wall Street's gambles. The U.S. government's decision to bail out the banks and to keep them afloat, and the Federal Reserve's zero interest rate policy have put the economic future of the U.S. and its currency in an untenable and dangerous position. It will not be possible to continue to flood the bond markets with $1.5 trillion in new issues each year when the interest rates on the bonds is less than the rate of inflation. Everyone who purchases a Treasury bond is purchasing a depreciating asset. Moreover, the capital risk of investment in Treasuries is very high. The low interest rate means that the price paid for the bond is very high. A rise in interest rates, which must come sooner or later, will collapse the price of the bonds and inflict capital losses on bondholders, both domestic and foreign. The question is, when is sooner or later? The purpose of this article is to examine that question. Let us begin by answering the question: how has such an untenable policy managed to last this long? A number of factors are contributing to the stability of the dollar and the bond market. A very important factor is the situation in Europe. There are real problems there as well. And the financial press keeps our focus on Greece, Europe, and the euro. Will Greece exit the European Union or be kicked out? Will the sovereign debt problem spread to Spain, Italy, and essentially everywhere except for Germany and the Netherlands? Will it be the end of the EU and the euro? These are all very dramatic questions that keep focus off the American situation, which is probably even worse. The Treasury bond market is also helped by the fear individual investors have of the equity market, which has been turned into a gambling casino by high-frequency trading. High-frequency trading is electronic trading based on mathematical models that make the decisions. Investment firms compete on the basis of speed, capturing gains at a fraction of a penny, and perhaps holding positions for only a few seconds. These are not long-term investors. Content with their daily earnings, they close out all positions at the end of each day. High-frequency trades now account for 70 to 80% of all equity trades. The result is major heartburn for traditional investors who are leaving the equity market. They end up in treasuries because they are unsure of the solvency of banks who pay next to nothing for deposits, whereas 10-year treasuries will pay about 2% nominal, which means, using the official consumer price index, that they are losing 1% of their capital each year. Using John Williams' shadowstats.com correct measure of inflation, they are losing far more. Still, the loss is only about 2% percentage points less than being in a bank, and unlike banks, the Treasury can have the Federal Reserve print the money to pay off its bonds. Therefore, bond investment at least returns the nominal amount of investment, even if its real value is much lower. The prostitute financial media tells us that the flight from European sovereign debt from the doomed euro and from the continuing real estate disaster into U.S. Treasuries, providing funding for Washington's $1.5 trillion annual deficits. Investors influenced by financial press might be responding in this way. Another explanation for the stability of the Fed's untenable policy is collusion between Washington, the Fed, and Wall Street. We'll look at this as we progress. Unlike Japan, whose national debt is the largest of all, Americans do not own their own public debt. Much of U.S. debt is owned abroad, especially China, Japan, and OPEC, the oil exporting countries. This places the U.S. economy in foreign hands. If China, for example, were to find itself unduly provoked by Washington, China could dump $2 trillion in U.S. dollar-denominated assets on world markets. All sorts of prices would collapse, and the Fed would have to rapidly create the money to buy up the Chinese dumping of dollar-denominated financial instruments. The dollars printed to purchase the dumped Chinese holdings of U.S. dollar assets would expand the supply of dollars in currency markets and drive down the dollar exchange rate. The Fed, lacking foreign currencies which to buy up the dollars, would have to appeal for currency swaps to sovereign debt-troubled Europe for euros, to Russia, surrounded by a U.S. missile system, for rubles, and to Japan, a country over its head in American commitment, for yen in order to buy up dollars with euros, rubles, and yen. These currency swaps would be on the books, unredeemable, and making additional use of such swaps problematic. In other words, even if the U.S. government can pressure its allies and puppets to swap their harder currencies for a depreciating U.S. currency, it would not be a repeatable process. The components of the American empire don't want to be in dollars any more than do the Britain, Ireland, and Spain. However, for China, for example, to dump its dollar holdings all at once would be costly, as the value of the dollar-denominated assets would decline as they dumped them. Unless China is faced with a U.S. military attack and needs to defang the aggressor, China as a rational economic actor would prefer to slowly exit the U.S. dollar. Neither do Japan, Europe, nor OPEC wish to destroy their own accumulated wealth from America's trade deficits by dumping dollars. But the indications are that they all wish to exit their dollar holdings. Unlike the U.S. financial press, the foreigners who hold dollar assets look at the annual U.S. budget and trade deficits. Look at the sinking U.S. economy. They look at Wall Street's uncovered gambling bets. They look at the war plans of the delusional hegemon and conclude, I've got to carefully get out of this. U.S. banks have a strong interest in preserving the status quo. They are holders of U.S. Treasuries and potentially even larger holders. They can borrow from the Federal Reserve at zero interest rates and purchase 10-year Treasuries at 2%. Thus earning a nominal profit of 2% to offset derivative losses. The banks can borrow dollars from the Fed for free and leverage them in derivative transactions. As Nomi Prinz puts it, the U.S. banks don't want to trade against themselves and their free source of funding by selling their bond holdings. Moreover, in the event of foreign flight from dollars, the Fed could boost the foreign demand for dollars by requiring foreign banks that want to operate in the U.S. to increase their Federal Reserve amounts, which are dollar-based. I could go on, but I believe this is enough to show that even actors in the process who could terminate it have themselves a big stake in not rocking the boat and prefer to quietly and slowly sneak out of dollars before the crisis hits. This is not possible indefinitely, as the process of gradual withdrawal from the dollar would result in continuous small declines in dollar values. That would end in a rush to exit, but Americans are not the only delusional people. The very process of slowly getting out can bring the American house down. The BRICS, known as the BRICS, Brazil, the largest economy in South America, Russia, the nuclear-armed and energy-independent economy on which Western Europe are dependent for energy. India, nuclear-armed and one of Asia's two rising giants. And China, nuclear-armed, Washington's largest creditor, supplier of America's manufactured and advanced technology products, and the new boogeyman for the military secret complex's next profitable Cold War. And let us not forget South Africa, the largest economy in Africa, are in the process of forming a new bank. The new bank will permit the 5 large economies to conduct their trade without the use of the U.S. dollar. In addition, Japan, an American puppet state since World War II, is on the verge of entering into an agreement with China in which the Japanese yen and the Chinese yuan will directly be exchanged. The trade between 2 Asian nations would be conducted in their own currencies without the use of the U.S. dollar. This reduces the cost of foreign trade between the 2 countries because it eliminates payments for foreign exchange commissions to convert from yen and yuan into dollars back into yen and yuan. Moreover, this official explanation for the new direct relationship avoiding the U.S. dollar is simply diplomacy speaking. The Japanese are hoping, like the Chinese, to get out of the practice of accumulating ever more dollars by having to park their trade surplus in U.S. treasuries. The Japanese U.S. puppet government hopes that the Washington hegemon does not require the Japanese government to nix the deal with China. Now, we have arrived at the nitty and gritty. The small percentage of Americans who are aware and informed are puzzled why the banksters have escaped with their financial crimes without prosecution. The answer might be that the banks, too big to fail, are adjuncts of Washington and the Federal Reserve in maintaining the stability of the dollar and Treasury bond markets in the face of untenable Fed policy. Let us first look at how the big banks can keep the interest rates on Treasuries low, below the rate of inflation, despite the constant increase in U.S. debt as a percent of GDP, thus preserving the Treasury's ability to service the debt. The imperiled banks, too big to fail, have a huge stake in low interest rates and the success of the Fed's policy. The big banks are positioned to make the Fed's policy a success. J.P. Morgan Chase and other giant-sized banks can drive down Treasury interest rates and thereby drive up the price of bonds, producing a rally by sending interest rate swaps. A financial company that sells IR swaps is selling an agreement to pay floating interest rates for fixed interest rates. The buyer is purchasing an agreement that requires him to pay a fixed rate of interest in exchange for receiving a floating rate. The reason for a seller to take the short side of the IR swap, that is, to pay a floating rate for a fixed rate, is his belief that rates are going to fall. Short selling can make the rates fall and thus drive up the prices of treasuries. When this happens, there is a rally in the treasury bond market that the prostitute financial media contributes to flight to the safe haven of the U.S. dollar and treasury bonds. In fact, the circumstantial evidence is that the swaps are sold by Wall Street whenever the Federal Reserve needs to prevent a rise in interest rates in order to protect its otherwise untenable policy. The swap sales create the impression of a flight to the dollar, but no actual flight occurs. I'm Michael Wordsworth. We're approaching the top of the hour, and we're going to have to get off the air. The Jowls of Justice are up next. I'd like to thank you for listening today. Please check us out. We'll be back on Friday at 3:30 p.m. Take care.